you just talk a little bit about the writing process? I guess now that you're writing, it sounds like most of the day. What's your routine?
So, I mean, I think the story you're writing is in connection with this book that I've edited.
Yes.
Called the Divine
Absolutely,
Spark.
but we can go beyond that. We can go anywhere.
Yeah. Basically, just to fill you in, I'm best known, obviously, for my book Fingerprints of the Gods, which was published in 1995. It was a #1 bestseller in many different countries. It sold, 5-6 million copies since then, and that's what I'm best known for, and that argues the case for a lost civilization, lost during cataclysmic events at the end of the last ice age, some 12,500 years ago.
Yeah, well, I've been reading Keeper of Genesis.
Keeper of Genesis was a follow-up to that.
And I also did look at Fingerprints of the Gods a bit as well. So I mean, I did.
So the reason I'm mentioning this to you is that what I'm actually writing at the moment, and what I am in the last stages of the final edit of, is a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods.
Okay.
A book that will be called Magicians of the Gods, and that is going to be published here in the UK by Hodder and Stoughton on the 10th of September.
Wow, that's great.
And in the US by St. Martin's Press, possibly a little later than that, possibly toward a bit closer to the end of the year. So that's what I've been, very much preoccupied with for the last 2+ years, with a lot of travels around the world, and then back home doing a lot of writing. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm writing that book is because there is just a huge raft of extremely persuasive new scientific information, which is largely only available in academic papers at the moment, which really strongly supports the whole idea of a lost civilization 12,500 years ago, and helps us to understand the nature of the cataclysm that afflicted the Earth at that time, and which has not yet been taken into account by historians and archaeologists. So it's like a fundamental building block in the story of the origins of civilization has been missing from the story up till now. So that's what I've been working on. And in my case, when I research a big book, I spend a lot of time in the field. You were asking me about the writing process. And I try then to get all of the field work out of the way, all of the reading out of the way as far as possible. And then I sit down and write very, very intensively for about 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
So that I can finish the writing of the book relatively quickly, let's say within a 6-month period.
Wow.
And
that includes the editing process as well?
Well, no. There's that to follow. Obviously, I have my own editing process. I try to write chapters as finished as I can possibly make them. I don't try and do a first draft and then do a complete redraft. I try to thoroughly finish and satisfy myself with each chapter before I move on to the next. I've been writing books for more than 30 years, and I've learned a little bit about the process as the time has gone by.
And you've also written for some of the best papers and magazines, from The Economist to The Guardian before that. So you've got great experience.
I cut my teeth in this trade as a journalist, and I think I learned certain skills as a journalist which have always stood me in good stead with my writing. But perhaps most important of all, that I really should be there and see that before writing about it. Mm-hmm. I don't like to just sit in an armchair and look at references. It's important to get out into the field and walk the walk. So I spend a lot of time doing that. And in this sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods, I've been on the road for the best part of 2 years, visiting sites all around the world. which feed into it. I also write novels. I've written 3 novels now. One is called Entangled, my first novel. It's a fantasy adventure novel, was published in 2010. And then I've written the first 2 of a series of 3 novels about the Spanish conquest of Mexico, it's called War God, that series. The first one was published in 2013. The second volume was published in 2014. And as soon as I get this huge non-fiction project out of the way, I shall be returning to complete the 3rd volume of the War God series. And I like writing fiction, very much like it, having spent most of my writing life working in the field of non-fiction. It's very enjoyable to get into material which it requires me to get inside my characters' heads and to understand their motives and to imaginatively inhabit the realms and the circumstances that they can confront. The first novel, Entangled, was pure fantasy adventure, although there was some basis in research. But the next series, the War God series, is very much based on historical research about the Spanish conquest of Mexico. But, of course, I am free to depart from history wherever I wish in the interests of the story. That's one of the joys of writing novels rather than writing non-fiction.
And do you take, I don't know, you're writing 16 hours a day, but you've also got a family. I mean, how do you make time for them?
Well, when I'm writing, I don't make time for them.
Okay.
I just don't.
For six months at a time?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it used to be even longer. I mean, I spent a year on the actual writing of Fingerprints of the Gods. I think I've got more efficient, better able not to waste time pursuing tracks in the story that aren't going to ever come to fruition. I've understood that whole process better as the years have gone by. So I spend a bit less now on the actual writing process than I used to, but I am fairly ruthlessly committed to my writing when I write. I can't take interruptions. I can't deal with anything else, really. I just have to set everything else aside.
You eat alone?
Pretty much, yeah. I usually just, my wife kindly brings me something for lunch and something for dinner, and I just eat and carry on working, basically. I find it's the only way a book can get done. People are often daunted by the prospect of writing a book.
Yep.
But actually, if you can write 2,000 words a day, you can get a book done fairly quickly.
Yep.
If you're talking about a 150,000 word book, in theory, you can do it in 75 days.
Sure.
And
actually,
that of course is what Stephen King does.
Most people do. Usually it's 100,000, 110,000 for a book.
Yeah, the big nonfiction books tend to be about 150,000 words for me, somewhere in that area. I've written even longer. My book Underworld is sort of 225,000 words, so way too many in my view. But so this is a skill that we build up over the course of a lifetime, and I've been, as I say, I've been writing for my living since the 1970s. So I think I hope I have got better at it. But the one thing that hasn't changed is that it is a full-on 100% commitment activity. Wow. And if I allow myself to get distracted from it, if, for example, we're at the stage now where I'm editing my book. I'm going through and doing updates and adding things here and there. If I were in the full flow of writing, my interview with you now would cost me an entire day.
Yeah, sure.
I would not be productive this day at all.
Wow.
So I have to rigorously cut out all interruptions when I'm writing.
Yep.
And that's the only way I can get it done. I understand other people.
What about I don't know, taking a break to consume something, from reading something for fun to watching something on TV? You won't do that?
So so typically when I'm writing, I generally get down to my desk about 9:30 in the morning, and the first thing I do is I read through everything I've written yesterday. I read through a printout of it. I hand mark it up. then I go back to the computer and I start entering those corrections on the electronic version. And by the time I've done that, and then I'll find there's more things I want to add and change while I'm doing that. By the time I've done that, a couple of hours have passed and I'm into a beginning of a flow. And then I just go with it through the day, and it builds up, and I'm really going strong by sort of 7 or 8 in the evening through midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. At that point, exhaustion, completely sets in, and I will then go upstairs, and maybe if my wife is still awake, we'll watch a TV program or something together, and then go to sleep.
Okay. So
and then I'm back to it the next morning.
The break is just right before you go to sleep, basically.
That's my break, yeah. An hour or so before I go to sleep, because I find if I go straight to bed from my desk,
it's hard to fall asleep.
It's really hard to fall asleep. My mind is whirling around and around. I need to disconnect a little bit from that. Yeah,
makes sense. Cool. Wow. Well, it sounds like you've got a great routine, and I guess you love it. I guess, right?
I love writing. I really do. I really do enjoy my job. I get a lot of intellectual stimulus from what I do. It's very exciting. I feel very privileged, very lucky to have the opportunity to do this, to visit extraordinary places, to inquire into amazing mysteries, and then to have the opportunity to set it all down in words. I love every minute of it. I do definitely, since I've started experimenting with fiction, I have to say I enjoy writing fiction more than I enjoy writing nonfiction.
Because you've got more freedom.
I got more freedom and I have more fun. It's just more fun as an intellectual exercise. The writing of the nonfiction, particularly in controversial areas, you have to be thinking all the time about the critics. Not people who are going to criticize your style of writing, but people who are going to criticize your presentation of the facts.
Sure.
And you have to armor your argument against that. Yeah. And that's very tedious.
Sure.
Constantly thinking where the next attack will come from and attempting to deflect it on the page itself.
Sure. Although in many ways, I mean, because part of what I was reading, it's you that are doing the attacking in a lot of these books, right?
Against the of course. These are combative books, totally. And what I'm attacking is a particular view of history. So I can absolutely expect to get attacked back.
Absolutely, sure.
There's an academic turf war around this subject, and there are many deeply versed experts in their fields who my work conflicts with. So I can expect, the absolute best in the field to be putting forward their very best arguments against me.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of these, I guess, key arguments. So you mentioned that you believe that there was a very advanced civilization that got destroyed around, I think it was so 12,500, so 10,000.
10,500 plus BC, thereabouts. Yes, I think that there's quite a compelling amount of anomalous evidence which requires us to consider that possibility. But what has really brought it home, and again, this is not without controversy itself, is that for the last 7 years. 8 years nearly, a group of very major scientists, mainly geophysicists, geologists, have been advancing the case that the Earth was hit by the fragments of a giant comet 12,800 years ago. It's being referred to these days as the Younger Dryas comet. The reason it's being called that is that 12,800 years ago, the Earth was beginning to emerge from the Ice Age. It was warming up.
Yep.
And then suddenly, there was a dramatic, catastrophic drop in global temperatures. It got colder than it had been at the peak of the Ice Age. There was enormous flooding all around the world. There were huge extinctions of animal species, particularly in North America. And nobody's ever really quite known why, until this group of scientists began to come up with the evidence of melt glass, nanodiamonds, siliceous scoria droplets, and so on from all around the world, which are the unmistakable proxies of a cosmic impact, that we got hit not by one object, but by about a dozen objects, most of which impacted...
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me just turn off this phone. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well... I put the phone in the other room. I apologize for that.
That's all right.
So yeah, you had this
multiple impacts from a comet that had already broken up, a bit like Shoemaker-Levy 9 broke up before it hit Jupiter in 1994. Mm-hmm. That had already broken up into multiple objects, quite a few of which hit the Earth 12,800 years ago. Most of them hit the North American ice cap. That's why there's not much in the way of craters, because the ice was 2 miles deep at the time.
Sure.
And it caused a dramatic instantaneous melt, the effects of which I've been on the road looking at in Oregon and Washington State, in particular, in the area called the Channeled Scablands on the Columbia Plateau, where you just have the most horrific disaster clearly took place there. And the best explanation for this is the comet impact. And it was the epicenter of a global disaster. Now, as somebody who was proposing a lost civilization in the window of 12,800 years ago, I said 10,500 BC, but, give or take 200 years, that distance time resolution is very difficult.
Sure.
As somebody who's been proposing a lost civilization 12,500 years ago, to find a major group of international scientists presenting evidence for a massive cataclysmic disaster on Earth 12,800 years ago is obviously very interesting.
Yeah, very much so. Although if the epicenter was North America, and you're at the time, the cradle of civilization was around the Middle East, or
who says?
Oh,
who says?
I see.
Don't you see that the whole point is that we are being told a story of our past, which is not taking this cataclysm into account, because it's only become apparent to science in the last 7 years.
But what about
our whole story of history has been built on the notion that the last time we had a major cosmic impact was 65 million years ago.
Yep.
So human history can evolve in this peaceful cosmic environment.
Yep.
But when you actually discover that that's not true, and that we had a disastrous series of impacts 12,800 years ago, it then begins to look odd that the whole story of our history begins to evolve only after that episode ends.
Yeah, because you do mention that, I think it was that the Machu Picchu might have been also quite ancient, and that the Mayans actually, might have taken it over from a previous civilization.
Yeah, the Incas. I think
the Incas, sorry, yes.
I think that it's quite possible that a number of sites around the world have been misdated. The Great Sphinx of Giza, you're reading Keeper of Genesis, is another one, which have been misunderstood because historians have had no reason to suppose that there might have been anything earlier.
Yep.
So it seems to them an outrageous hypothesis to suggest that you have a Sphinx that's 12,000 plus years old.
Yep.
But then we have new anomalous discoveries in archaeology, most notably Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is a series of gigantic stone circles, much bigger than Stonehenge, multiple times of Stonehenge, which were deliberately buried by the people who created them more than 10,500 years ago. And the origin of that site goes back to 9,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. And that's exactly the date of the end of this mysterious Younger Dryas episode. The Earth went into that cold plunge 12,800 years ago, and it came out of it 11,600 years ago. And then you get this mysterious site, which is built in Turkey, on a gigantic scale, which, when you look at it, you then have to say, well, maybe it isn't so crazy to suggest that the Sphinx is 12,000 plus years old. because archaeologists can't say anymore, show me another site where there's another major megalithic structure that dates to 12,000 years old, because we can show them that now. There it is, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. So things are changing a lot, and it's in order to, keep up with these new developments and consider what they mean for my primary hypothesis that we may have lost an episode of civilization that I've written this book. There's also an extraordinary pyramid site in Indonesia called Gunung Padang, which has been identified initially by geologists, and which they then did remote sensing on with ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and other technologies, and found it to be a huge man-made pyramid with the lower levels, once they drilled down into them, producing datings that go back even older than 12,000 years ago, go back 22,000 years into the past.
Wow.
And that's interesting because Indonesia was, during the Ice Age, a very different place from the place it is today. It wasn't a series of islands. It was a huge continent jutting out of Southeast Asia, and it was dramatically flooded about 12,000 plus years ago. So there's a lot going on, and, I've been revisiting all of this to produce this new book. But, of course, I have other interests. I've mentioned the fiction, and I also have a great interest in shamanism and altered states of consciousness.
And yeah, could you explain also the link between your interest in an ancient civilization to the divine spark?
Well, there's quite a few links, actually. One of them is just an unwillingness to take at face value stories that we're told by the establishment and by the mainstream. We're told that history was a certain way, and very few voices at a serious level are raised in challenging that. Mm-hmm. I feel that that's a role I can play. I can use my skills and my abilities to challenge what has hitherto been regarded as a completely settled issue. And I feel the same about altered states of consciousness.